So Mike and I wrote an application to National Institute of Mental Health. We proposed taking an established meditation app and adapting it for people who are incarcerated. Mike has done a lot of research in the Wisconsin state prison system in collaboration with DOC over the past 10 or 12 years. I've done a lot of research on mindfulness interventions, adapted mindfulness interventions for different trauma-exposed populations. So we had this great idea, which is like, hey, we got this app, which our center co-developed. Maybe we should like adapt it, put it into prisons, and that'll be great, and everybody's going to benefit. And then we got a horrible score on that grant from NIMH with some really constructive feedback, but a lot of it boiled down to, if you talk to any of the stakeholders who are involved in this, to find out like what kinds of logistical barriers are going to come up, but B, and kind of more importantly, is like, is this a good solution to the problem? Or like, do you even understand what the problem is that you're trying to address, and really doing some deep engagement with stakeholders to understand that better. So ICTR, who's on campus here, the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, has some really phenomenal funding mechanisms to do things like establish partnerships with community partners and do stakeholder engagement work that's a foundational part of doing research out in the community, but which oftentimes is not funded, and there aren't funding mechanisms. We had a one-year funding mechanism summer of 2021 into 22 to do stakeholder engagement work around this question of mental health supports for people who are impacted by the criminal legal system. And the main project kind of focus of this year of work that we were doing together was to plan and then implement a series of stakeholder advisory meetings. So these were like focus groups. We had a series of 4 meetings with a group of about 10 men who had been incarcerated. And then we had a series of 4 meetings with a group of women, 10 to 12 women, who also had experiences of incarceration. And going into this, well, this is the next slide. I'm going to let Karen talk about going into it, what we were thinking, and then kind of what evolved.
Yeah, so a lot of us at Nehemiah have various connections throughout the university. Some of those are close relationships, some of those are a little more in passing. But what's very typical is for someone to reach out to us from campus and say, hey, I'm doing this study with this group. Can you give us some people?
Right.
And so for the most part, our answer is either to not respond to the email, if that's how it's worded, or say no. Oftentimes though, an email will come back and I'll just say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? And to say, if we're going to be involved in your project, here's how, the compensation we'll need, here's the considerations that will need to be made. And, that happens for a lot of reasons. One of them is to protect the people that are involved. One of them is to make sure that we're not just, giving free labor, to make sure that people that are asking us for work understand like how much actually goes into doing that sort of thing. But ultimately, what it's really about is making sure that we're not just doing studies for the sake of doing studies, but we're doing things that are actually going to benefit our community, like I said at the beginning. And so that's what I said, both Dan and Mike had relationships with Aaron, I think, and Coop, and we'd done some work together before. And so when it came to partnering on this particular project, that was the question is, kind of, if we're going to do this together, then we need to be involved from the beginning. And the beginning means the research question. So what are we doing together and how are we going to solve it? That all has to be co-created. And this was the first time that someone from the university actually took us up all the way on that and was willing to dive in with us. So a couple of the things that it really just transformed from the original idea that was described into the grant, and really to figuring out like, how can we make this a sustained partnership, but then how can we do this in a way that's going to still get the overall outcome that Dan and Mike were hoping to get, but make sure that what we want to see at Nehemiah and what they are hoping to accomplish, we can kind of blend those together and get the best of worlds in the project.
Anything else anybody wants to add at this point?
Well, I guess I'll ask this for everyone that's here. Now, are you guys just going to listen to us, or you're all actually going to talk? Oh, thank you. I needed to know that.
They're gathering information.
Right, okay, I just needed to know that because I know a lot of times we come and speak at UW, you're like, oh, okay, all right, okay, we're done. And then we have the conversation afterwards, right? With people in the hallway, and then we're here for another hour or two. But because the way I look at it is that we're all community, right? And the reason why we do the work that we're doing is because we want to see some changes happen in our community, but it all starts with us. As I say, it's gonna end with us, because hopefully the things that we do now will make it easier for the next people that will step in. So that's why I asked that. So I'm sorry.
That's on my hand.
Yeah.
Burning.
I feel like I missed something. Can you explain like what Nehemiah is or what you want to do?
That's important.
Okay.
We are a 30-year-old organization on the south side of Madison, and really started to address racial disparities in Madison in the 90s that are still existing today. And so Nehemiah has kind of a combination of direct service programming, and then more recently in the last 10 years, some systems approach to try to make some bigger changes. But we've been mostly focused in kind of the K through 12 education lane, which includes a really long running, like 25 years plus summer camp, for lack of a better term. It's about 6 weeks for kids that's really focused on primarily Afrocentric curriculum and self-identity, self-esteem, executive functioning for kids from kindergarten to 5th grade. And then we have some other middle school and high school programming. And then the other big area we have is reentry programming, which is really what's represented today. And so we have a housing program of 4 houses in the Madison area with people that have a history of incarceration can rent. We also have a weekly support group called Man Up that Aaron leads, and then some advocacy in the courtroom and for other issues that happen. Beyond that, our systems approach include things like this. We have a 9-week Black History class called Black History for a New Day. Highly recommend it. Nehemiah.org is our website. Who's taking it?
Awesome.
So the next one will
Yeah.
run in September. So check that out. And just some other things where we're connecting with different parts of government or different systems to make sure that we can push. If we really want to close the gap in racial disparities, it's more than just programming. So
Well done.
thanks.
Yeah. But thank you for being honest and just kind of just asking that question. So I love when people do that. Because sometimes, you guys know, sometimes people just sit there like, all right, okay, I don't know why I'm here, but someone told me to be here. So
And we're not all from this community, and we operate in different parts of the communities in which we live. These are some of the these are just like some examples, some illustrative examples of what happened as a result of the way in which we entered this partnership, where we kind of set everything aside and like let the folks who know and who work with the population that we were working with what was going to make this an effective project. And I wonder if I could turn it over to Talia to pick one of these or a couple of these off and kind of talk about how we propose this in the grant, and I'll just say that like when we wrote this grant application, we were writing it for reviewers in a way that they kind of expected to be reading this, and it was successful in terms of achieving the outcome. But then once we had the funding, we had to say, what are we actually trying to do here? So instead of what's in this grant application, what is the goal? And turning it over to our community partners and saying, given this is the goal, like, how should we actually implement this project?
Yeah, so I'll talk from my perspective as a graduate student heading into the project. What was written in the grant was that myself and also Carmen would be the facilitators of our stakeholder advisory groups with formerly incarcerated men and women, and that would be a major role for me. Also, graduate students are often in charge of recruitment, reaching out to participants and making sure everyone arrives on time and things like that. And became very clear from our initial meetings with this group that wasn't the best way to do it. First, we needed someone with lived experience to be facilitating these groups, and that expertise was, eons above what I would offer that stakeholder advisory group. And also for recruitment, I didn't have those community relationships that the people sitting at this table did have. And that the way we recruit in research typically, which is, calling people up, sending out flyers, all of those that I had been trained to do in my academic career, wasn't really the best way to do that. Maybe I'll pass it to Aaron. You can talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, going back to what Dan said, really relinquishing the power, the dynamics of power, balancing it out, that was huge because so often people come in and they're gonna get to know because they just want total control over the situation, and that's not gonna work. But what did work was the fact that they understood that, listen, we'll get you the people, that's not an issue, and we'll be able to ask questions that you wouldn't even think of based on that experience. Right, and I think what wound up happening is they gave me a list of questions, and basically I took them and remixed them into something that made sense to me. To be able to convey back to the individuals and then take that information. And I'm sure they got more than what they would ever imagine. But I mean, it was just huge just to be able to play those roles out and individuals seeing that these are not just the only experts at the table. If you just let this all happen organically, you'll see the expertise from all of us. And that's what started to come to fruition.
Can I say something there?
Please.
Yes, I would like to say an example about the questions. That I was fortunate to be in both groups with Aaron and with the woman. And it was just so beautiful to see how one question, for example, the first day, what helped you during the days of your incarceration? What helped you made it through? And just the one question that offering to the group and how much was shared from the heart in such an honest, courageous way that was really beautiful, that process. And with that, then the one question for each one of the 4 groups, the men and the women, and just what inspired when we put that agenda, the initial agenda aside, and then just really we were present for the people there with the one simple question. It was just beautiful.
I think that also goes to what Aaron was saying too, as far as one, to allow them to be the experts of their lives, right? And we're not trying to be no one's probation officer, trying to guide them this way or that way. They're saying, hey, you are the expert of your life. How did you do things? And then also being able to bring that to the table, to the university, and say, hey, look, this is how I did it. I've done things differently than the way how Aaron had did it, and vice versa, right? But I think the encouraging part about that even for those men and women, they say, hey, look, we're all here to support each other. It's not just, we're just trying to take something from you. We want to be able to give you something in return, but then also being able to credit what you have done. In our community, don't know where everyone is from, but in this community, that's not something that happens on a regular basis. It's easier for institutions to be able to just take, right? For people who have been incarcerated, they've seen the taking from that, right? From getting paid 27 cents an hour, right? So see the taking, right? Yeah, exactly, right? You know what I mean? So when you look at all of those types of things, and then when people are really saying, you know what? Not only am I the expert of my life, but then also I'm a person of value here in front of the university, but then also in my own household, and with my family, so on and so forth. So I
see your hand over there.
Oh,
just one quick thing in there. It really started to display more than anything experts that people would have never even saw. They would have never even, and a lot of times you got a lot of expertise around you, and we don't even utilize what we have. And we'll quick to let's go get someone from this state, or you got people right around you that have those traits and can be brought out. And I think for Dan, Mike, yourself, and Talia, I think every person got a chance to be able to see, like, wait a minute, it's not just one person. It's a multitude of these people, and they really do have something to bring to the table. Like for real. So.
And we obviously don't know that. Like if we're recruiting in a typical way and like putting up a flyer at a community center where we think people with a history of incarceration are likely to spend time, like we may get 10 people into a room. But if Deb was here, she would be talking about the fruit salad of people in the room, not in a pejorative way, but like, you don't want to have too much cantaloupe in your fruit salad, right? Or else the whole thing tastes like cantaloupe. So Aaron knew, not just like on paper, did people check the box? Like, do they have the minimum inclusion criteria? but what is the dynamic that's going to be created in that space? And part of that dynamic starts with dinner. We'd start every meeting with dinner, and it wasn't takeout sandwiches from Melio's. No disrespect to Melio's if anybody has a, you know, family member who works there, but we had home cooked food from somebody in the community who was a caterer who had a history of incarceration. We didn't put the food on paper plates. We put the food on china. And none of these things are things that Mike or myself, maybe Carmen and Talia would have thought to do it, but like, this is not just the way we're used to operating. It's more of this checkbox, like we need to have dinner. Okay, check, we have dinner. But I think just like, yeah, the whole creation of that space, the facilitation of the questions allowed something to emerge that otherwise wouldn't, which is just not the way that we're used to thinking about these projects.
And the dinner is part of the meeting, not an add-on to the end, it's
Right.
part of the thing. So,
And
And you can see everything was thought out, like you could totally see like from the food to, you could like totally be able to see like they had to really think about everything. From the silverware, napkins, everything, it was just, you could totally tell it was personable, and you would, whoever saw it would probably want to just be involved just because the orchestration of it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, look, you're at a family table, right? We're having family discussion. Sometimes people who came with different things that were going on with them that day at their job before they got there, right? So how do you work through this? You know, let's be able to create something. The more and more we create it can start off very, very small, have this little small conversation, like, look, Joe Bob didn't bother me today, or whatever, but how do you work through that? And now you're starting to build trust. And I think over time that has happened all the way around the board. But again, that goes right back to we all, it's like here, we have to talk as though we are all community and not just act like it. That's what we are.
Yeah.
My question is, I think that you made a comment about we wrote these the way that they want to listen to it, because what I'm hearing usually doesn't get funded. Right? Like what you're doing.
None of this was in the grant.
It's like, yeah, communities will connect. But when I write that,
But
it
this,
doesn't get
yeah,
funded. So can you talk a little bit about like that code switching and how do we do that? Where actually we're lucky that you three said, oh, we're gonna write it this way, but actually we're gonna do it this way. And that's a little nerve-wracking also for the university staff of like, oh, we're saying that we're doing this, but actually we're doing this. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that.
I think we all can. I mean, one thing, part of what you're speaking to is like, what are the priorities in academia? And this, for me, this was really nerve-wracking to hand over control in this way. It's easy, like a couple years later, to talk about it as like, it's really good that we did things this way, but it's really nerve-wracking because it is expected that we get to the end of that grant period and we have deliverables and we can write a report. And if it's a federal agency that, you know, we've made sufficient progress that we can get funding for the next year, et cetera, because of what these priorities are. So again, this specific grant mechanism that we're applying to helped a lot there, because we knew the agency that we were working with and like what the goal of the project was. Ultimately, like it was about developing the relationship, developing the partnership. It wasn't so much about what we were learning from the meetings, which were incredibly useful and valuable, but it was about that partnership. But you're right that you can't necessarily put that in a grant application. So I think you were going to say something about that in the code switching maybe, or
go there? Okay. So there's a little bit of both. And one of the things that I've been able to do at Nehemiah, because I have that academic experience and then I also have the community experience, it really is blending the two different languages. So how do I take what, you know, our program staff like Aaron and Coop are saying and what they actually do, and how do we translate that into language that's going to be understood by funders? A lot of the time we can do that, but it really depends on having that trust between, if we're not the first author on the grant, if we're not the agency being funded, then I have to trust that what I'm saying to the academic partner, they understand, no, this is what we mean,
Right.
and that the money's gonna actually get spent that way. So part of that beginning is that, I mean, the relationship piece can't be underestimated. That's the part that usually doesn't get funded, is the time it takes to develop the relationship, which is necessary to do this work in the right way. But, you know, so if Nehemiah is writing a grant, one of the things that we can do, if we're co-writing a grant, one of the things that we can do is write that in a way where we know it's gonna be received, but then also, you know, make sure that that our priorities are represented there too. And then the idea is that the hope is that if we keep doing it this way, and agencies are starting to recognize the value of community engagement partnerships. I don't think they recognize what it needs to look like, but there's at least the words around it. So if we can start putting in this kind of, way of doing things, hopefully it'll start to catch on, so.
Yeah, I just think this talks to one of the lessons, right, which is learning to trust in each other's skills, right? So I might have been trained in writing and have that grant writing, Dan does that too. But when we also listen to the other skills and expertise and mesh that into one, I think that's kind of the magic recipe. And for all future grants too, is learning whose skills to pull in where and equating them all on the same level.
Because I think currently we have quite a few grants going.
Right.
And in saying that, what it really is like, so like I had, as they talked about, I do a group called Man Up. But I really wanted to expand it and bring more meat to it. And so I talked to Mike, he's not here, which he was. But so I just brought him a lot of the information, right? And I knew his expertise is definitely not mine. He's on the brain. I ain't on none of that. So. But anyway, but I gave him all the information that he needed. And he took the information that I gave to him, and in turn, we wound up getting a grant for $50,000. So.
And I think one of the things to emphasize here really is that honoring expertise part. We get a lot of inquiries, and then the partnerships that make it farther, like, we want to make sure that we're honoring what you're doing. This is academia saying to us, we don't want you to feel exploited, and the language is there. But honestly, we know that from the first conversation. I don't really need you to tell me that. Like, we're gonna find out really quickly if this is an equitable partnership. And we're gonna learn from each other, right? There are gonna things that hopefully the academic partner will learn from us, and hopefully that we'll learn from them, and like combining how we both do things to get the best possible outcome. But the people that were, when we talk about lived experience, in this case, developing an app for people in prison or people who have been in prison, there's very, very, very few people at this university that have that experience. So what's the difference between, I went to school for a lot of years to get a PhD, that training in life experience? Like, we both know a lot about a certain area, and we have to combine them so that we can take it farther. And so part of this whole Wisconsin idea, are we there yet, is really, and I think there's probably a lot of this in this room, but really, how do we get over ourselves as academics? Like, yeah, that's great, we got letters, but not everybody gets letters for this kinds of study that they did. And but who cares really? At the end of the day, the letters don't necessarily make you smart. So really, how do we as individuals get to this genuine respect for other people's expertise and other places around our community expertise? And do we consider ourselves as academicians part of the community, or do we look at ourselves as separate? What does that look like? And that also, I'll just based on the slide, I'll just mention, again, that goes for the entirety of your study. If you're not asking the right question at jump, you're not going to get the right information. I mean, that's kind of central to the research process, is formulating a good question, right? And if you don't know that experience, that lived experience, how can you possibly ask the question? you don't even know what to ask.
Mhm.
And so making sure that, and whether it's, research or it's just a program partnership, people have to be involved. The communities that you're hoping to impact have to be involved even before that grant gets written, so that you're going in the right direction. Right, and that goes from formulating the question to design, to collection of data, to analysis of data, to interpretation, every step in the process. It doesn't all look the same. Like we're gonna have, and that's part of combining skills is one of us might be a statistics expert and be able to process large amounts of data, but other people can take that, what comes out of that and say, this is what it means to us. So we're all bringing our skill sets to the table, just like we would in any other team. And then figuring out how do we share that to get the information out there, so.
I like that. I would just say it's in the most simplest terms, we do a lot of research, like people will research homelessness with no experience at the day and have an answer. But how does that work? It would be like, or it would be like, people researching Black people, no Black people at the table. So how is that working, right? And your only understanding is through a book, which I believe strongly that in the academic world, there are limitations. It's almost like a band. It's designed to protect you until you're ready to go to wherever it is. And based on lived experience, the only difference is we don't have that. It's not parenting. It's like no kid gloves on. You're just gonna learn life.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And you're gonna get it in this rawest form. And I think being able to convey that and being able to share that and bring those two together, again, I think it's super huge because now you can get a greater understanding versus that you only understand it from the capacity of book knowledge. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. So when I said I'm with NPH, I should have spelled out my letters. Thank you. So I am with the University of Wisconsin Master of Public Health Program. So I have worked with Anthony and I've worked with Karen, which they have taken some of our students and they have done what a lot of people refer to as field experience. We call it APEXs. It's projects that they must complete before they graduate, give them like real life scenarios. So what I have to say about Nehemiah is I've had some students, I can honestly say probably have never been out past University Avenue. They have been involved from undergrad to grad, and working with Nehemiah, you instantly saw the change because they actually got an opportunity to get involved and work with individuals and learn about the community. Honestly, they shed some of the arrogance off of them. We're in a safe space, right? So shed some of that off of them. So I'm grateful to the two of you for taking on students. And also just to emphasize, it's really important that we engage students or young people at the ground level while they're students. Because once they graduate and they get out into that real world and they keep that code of arrogance off school, it makes it difficult to get grants, to get help, to open that door of communication. So thank you both again for that.
Oh, thank you.
And if you want to take some more. I got a bunch of them.
Yeah. Let's talk afterwards.
Yeah.
Let's have our conversation afterwards. Yeah.
I'm just saying that if you're looking at opportunities to work with the community, don't forget the students. Sometimes it's free work, sometimes it isn't. But there are a lot of students that have expertise that can take those tasks off your hand and beef up your grant if needed. So that was.
We actually, we have another organization, which was a partner organization to Nehemiah called Focus Interruption, where we work with violent crimes throughout the community. Actually hired one of the people that were sent by you as well. So she works for us part-time. So yeah, if as she would say, if she was here, she would say she needed all of that to be able to help her wherever her next step is going to be, whether it's here in Wisconsin or somewhere else. So yeah, which was a blessing.
Yes. So hand in hand.
One of the things I was gonna say, just sort of jumping off of that, is that, I've been thinking about students as community members, is I've been incredibly surprised as I've opened up the door and talking about diversity and lived experience, how many students I have in class who have experienced either incarcerated themselves or with loved ones that are currently incarcerated or have been incarcerated. And I had never heard that before until I started to teach this, community-based class. We're talking about lived experience, and all of a sudden the students are starting to write initially in the reflections about it, just to me. And then, this semester, they're all just talking about it openly in class, just sort of shifting that stigma and shame. So we shouldn't think that they don't have lived experience either. I think that was an assumption I was making that was incorrect.
Just wondering about outcomes and things people gain from this kind of work. Making sure that people who are participating in the program feel like they're gaining as much as for example, you're conducting a study. Well, you're going to go on to get a degree based on that. Right. What are the people that are in this program? Are they getting something that feels equally as valuable? I just wonder if you how you're thinking about that. Since there's sort of this, differential between a student or a professor who has kind of an end goal or upwardly mobile because of this research, and then the person participating in the program, what they're getting out of it.
So probably before we started this, the way I would have answered that question is, well, we're paying them. Right. So you knew what you were signing up for. I told you, we're gonna giving you dinner. And that's part of it. One thing that we've learned again and again is that stories that people are willing to share with us are extremely valuable and hard earned. And there's a cost to acquiring those stories. And there's also can be a cost to sharing those stories and to being really, really thoughtful about this gift that you have that you've shared with me, that I'm being a good steward of that. And what that means is what am I doing with that information? Who am I sharing it or not sharing it with? In what ways am I sharing it and not sharing it? And another part of it that I think that speaks more directly to your question maybe is a piece about accountability. And once you've shared this information with me, and once we've developed this relationship that's not transactional, but that is grounded in trust and love and authentic care, I have a deep obligation now to be a good steward of that, to do the most that we can with that information to make sure that it actually has an impact. And the other thing that we're obligated to do is to not just come to rooms like this and share with a group of people working within the academy what we're doing, but the feedback process to share, here's what we learned from this process, here's how it's having an impact. Because one thing that we've learned from a lot of our participants is they take part in these research studies, they sign their name, they give their samples, they tell their stories, fill out the questionnaires, whatever, and then they don't know. And maybe something really impactful and life-changing is happening with that information. It's probably not, but it's possible. But even if it is, people don't usually hear about that unless we build in those kinds of accountability and feedback mechanisms.
So a few months after the project ended, where we had the stakeholder advisory groups, we held a gratitude lunch where everyone came back together. So this team, but also all the people who were at the stakeholder advisory groups, and we showed everyone what we learned. So I worked with an undergraduate and we made an infographic that we printed out large and put up on the board so that everyone who participated in the groups could see what we heard and then share what wasn't represented that they wanted to be heard. And we all got to be in community together months after the project ended. And that felt really meaningful to me.
And we are, excuse me, part of the purpose of this project is to develop a community advisory board focused on issues related to incarceration that lives in Nehemiah. So we have certain centers in the university that focus on, community engaged research, but the power still lies within the university. So we're building that out at Nehemiah through this. And some of the people that participated in the first group will continue on in a more director kind of ways, like steering committee kind of way. And other people will continue on just by jumping in. But I will also say, you know, from an organizational standpoint, one of the things that we at Nehemiah get out of this is working with different students and departments is we're always going to be doing teaching and training. Every interaction we have, even if it's not asked for, we're going to be doing so. We need you to have a better understanding what we're doing so that we can move forward together. And that furthers our mission. So sometimes I've had a couple of partners say to us, oh, you're doing all this teaching for this project, you know, what are you guys getting out of it? And like, this is what we're getting out of it. This is what we want to do. We want to, so that when, you know, students and professionals go back out into their positions, hopefully you take this knowledge with you and tell people about it.
Right.
And that's how we make systems change. So that's a big part of it for us.
And if I can say.
I think it's-
something,
go ahead.
there's something really quick, and more at the individual level, and I really appreciate that question too. That some of, what we did during the groups, where people would come, would have the meal, and it was all with the thoughtfulness that you have heard before. And then we'll have a little mindfulness practice, and then we check in with one another, so it was more like a circle process, and then there may be the question. And many people comment at the end that it was a gift for them to be able to share what they share, and it was held in the way that it was held, with that deep respect and the deep knowing from people with experience, that, oh, yes, I hear you. So there was that sentiment of deep appreciation for that circle process.
And that's not the way we designed the project. Like that was not on my radar at all when we wrote this grant, is that actually participating in these groups is going to be something that's supportive for people, and that in and of itself was a valuable end, not just that it was getting us the information we needed, but that this would support people. But it's only because of that, the way in which it was co-constructed, that we got to that place.
And I want to throw something in there, just to really consider something, you know, that we created within the group, and kind of they threw up like all the different, but it was a lot of authentic conversation. And I'll tell you why that's so huge. Dan said something in one of our meetings, I'll never forget it. He said, I'm used to taking control over this stuff. Like, I'm not used to, you know, but that's huge, because he could have not said that at all, right? And that would have just been in his head. He'd have knew that, we wouldn't have known that, right? But I say that to say that in whatever your endeavor is, like, it needs to be some transparency. It needs to be, you know, whatever you're trying to get out of it. I don't think it's wrong, right, or indifferent. I just think that this is what you're trying to get. And I think fair exchange is never a robbery. When you can split that up, you know, there's something you're trying to gain out of it, as well as whether it's an org or an individual, there's something they're trying to get out of it. And as long as I think you can keep that part right and real, then I think you're gonna get what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of the point too.
So I had a question kind of on that initial relationship building between like community partners and the university. And there was this good conversation about like how you steward that trust throughout the process. But like, I'm thinking about alumni in the university, and there's some super valid distrust of the university, like that they're authentically going to do what they say they're going to do. And just like, how do you start that relationship from a good spot and get people to know that it's also coming from a good spot, despite the process being.
I'll jump on that. So Mike, who's not here, we built a relationship, like I know his family, his children, all the above, but then it started like that. I didn't know him at all, and he didn't know me at all. But I guess for me, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, like him as an individual, I knew his heart was in the right place, period. And for that was huge to me. And so getting other people to buy in wasn't even an issue. I just told him, I'll be your bridge, right? So you don't have to worry about trying to convince or do any of that. You don't even have to worry about that part. Because I had an intimate relationship with him. I had a great understanding of what he wanted to do, and vice versa. He was taking the time to really hear what we wanted to do and how these things could look. And so I knew him as an individual was very genuine. And so that in itself built that camaraderie where on our end, it was like, listen, manpower is not an issue. Getting people will never be an issue. And on his end, writing a grant and doing all those things is not an issue on his end. So it just worked out. And so it's really about just getting out networking.
But also just to add on to that, but I think the other part of it that's really important and needs to be said by us already having those types of networks and having that community. Most of the people who come to Man Up, we have people that have been there 5-6 years. We have people who have been there, I've been there my 10, 11 now or something of that nature. And so they've been coming on and off for years. And so because we're trusted, it makes it easier for Mike. But also, if there's something that's not right, we're going to say that and have that conversation as well. Like, oh, you know what? I understand this is what the grant says, but this is what we're saying. And this is not going to work out for whatever reason. But not saying that in a way where it's trying to, where it feels like, okay, all right, the partnership is not going to work out. But being as honest, be as honest as possible. Because if we're not doing that, we shouldn't even be at the table together.
The other piece, I'm sorry.
Oh, I want to talk about you actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about honesty, can I say this real quick? Honesty and having courageous people at the table, because I still remember one of the first meetings. And Karen said in such a beautiful way that it really landed inside talking about, I don't even remember the terms that you used, but about the time, like how sometimes us white people show up with our agendas. You know, and-
Yeah.
Details.
Change the tone for subsequent meetings and we're really good at doing that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna talk about was in one of our first meetings together, we're like, okay, what's the agenda for our meeting? And like, actually, the agenda is that there's not really gonna be an agenda for the meeting. And so, you know, we're used to going through and you want to make good use of people's time. That's always true. But that doesn't always mean having an agenda with items and sub items, and this is gonna be 10 minutes, this is gonna be 5 minutes. No, half of our, let's do a hybrid. Half of our meeting, here are the things that we need to accomplish. The other half is gonna be like, Aaron, we never would have heard Dan say that. If we hadn't have half of our hour meeting, we just.
Aaron asking us pointed questions.
Yeah. But I mean, just that room for us to just talk, and you mentioned like someone had a bad day earlier, what you bring in with you. I mean, in the work at Nehemiah that gets done, you can't separate it from your personal life. Like it's all blended together. So that means, especially for these guys that are out doing the work with real people every day, sometimes you gotta have a whole hour where you're venting and decompressing and debriefing, because you can't do the next step unless you do that. And so that's part of that relationship building that, yes, is not built in to any of our frameworks, but we have to find room. And, you know, kind of what I talked about, which is one of my favorite things, is in global business, there's a whole field called Koenigs, and it's about how people value time. So if you're going to be a great global business person, you have to learn that there's monochronic and there's polychronic. Monochronic is us, agenda focused, efficiency driven. Polychronic is relationship and trust driven. It's all over the world. It's not just subcultures in the United States. So we just gotta, again, get over ourselves and realize that there are other ways to do things.
And there is a place for monochromatic time.
Yes.
It's very valuable. It allows us to do things like write grants and get funding and publish papers. And like, there's, it has its limitations. And being able to know like how to flip back and forth it's a challenge, but I think that's the key to this.
Do you have a question?
No, I'm just like nodding because you guys are hopefully you're preaching to the choir. But earlier, our keynote speaker was talking about how some of us are liberal, well-intentioned folks. We are the ones that perpetuate racism and classism. And it's because of the systems that we've created and we've always done. And it's a challenge to say, you know what, there's a time and a place for that. But if we're gonna really make a change that's sustainable, You have to change the way we've gone about doing business.
Right, that's right.
A meeting doesn't necessarily have to be this because it doesn't leave room for brainstorming, creativity, free flowing of ideas. Because people are gonna be intimidated when they come into a room with people with tons of things behind their names, credentials and titles. And if you don't say at the very beginning, this is our agreement, we all come in here as equal.
That's
Okay?
right.
This is what our goal is. Disregard what has happened in the past. We apologize for our ancestors, for everything that's gone, but right now, we need you to be present. And we respect you. And I think with the young people that you talked about, I think we've normalized the conversation, changed the narrative about returning citizens. And maybe it's even through pop culture, shows like oh, Orange is the New Black and other things, that people are talking about it and they're realizing that they're not alone. And unfortunately, in past history and the way our American culture is we don't talk about the bad. You keep it private, you wanna put up, you wanna build from the bootstraps up. Well, everyone didn't come with boots. So we're finally acknowledging that, and it's not anything to be ashamed or embarrassed about. And you can talk about it, and there's other people, because we have social media, we have different groups to support us. So we do come in with lots of lived experiences, and it's reprogramming ourselves in the way we've been told through academia, this is how you have to do things. And this stems beyond just our social justice work. For us who work in medical and health professions, the way we think of how we train our medical students, that needs to be revisited. Because the rest of the world has figured out it does not have to work like this. We shouldn't just be solely driven by the data, the quota, the numbers, business, money.
Yeah.
And
There you go. Okay, yes.
It got real.
Right. I'm like, yeah. This, need to hear that. Come on, talk to us, y'all. Yeah, come on with it. Yeah, ask questions. I mean, that's why we're here. I mean, a big part of why we're here, right? You know, to making sure that we're community.
I have a question about, again, as we are learning from these experiences and those who participate in our study groups and help with our questions, and do we give them opportunities to become co-authors to help present?
Definitely, yeah.
That's exactly all of that you said. When the young lady back there asked, what are they getting out of it? Those are things that's taking place.
We're writing a paper together.
Yeah.
You know, and that helps because it's role modeling. You know what? I never thought I could do this. And then here with the Odyssey project, you know, you showing people a pathway.
And how do we build importance of academic partners being part of community conversations and listed on those rosters? How do you get that part of your CV, build that part up?
And another interesting thing to me is all of a sudden you have consultants everywhere.
Exactly.
So how do we
Which is
step and
needed.
say, you need to become a consultant?
That's it right
So when
there.
people pick your brain, you're getting paid to have your brain picked. Because this academic person, this researcher is taking your ideas and they're going to write it and they're going to get paid for it.
That's the thing right there. And in your grants, one of the ways that you can do this is thinking about who are you calling a consultant and contractor, and who are you writing participant support costs, right?
Right.
How much is my hour worth? How much is your hour worth?
Right.
Are they the same? Like, how are you portioning out? And that's actually, you know, like I review a lot of grants, and getting into more reviewing some of the community engaged, you know, academic grants and seeing how budgets are balanced. No, it's not just a couple $100 for food. Do you have an equal division of labor? Now, there's some things EW is going to require, like a ridiculous overhead percentage, but who's going to take the hit on your side so that someone on the community can benefit in that way, right? It's got to be all the way from start to finish. So rethinking who you're calling a consultant is really, really important. Thanks for bringing that up.
It's funny, I laughed to myself, I was like, you must have been in that meeting I was
Yeah.
in a little bit earlier. Yeah, we were having this similar talk, which is like, no, you need to be a mentor friend of mine was saying, oh, hey, you need to be teaching here or doing X, Y, and Z. I'll set the stage up for you to do X, Y, and Z. So, you know, and being able to have those conversations, I'm like, yeah, well, okay, cool, I'm with it, you know, but again, being able to have an army of folks who are doing the exact same thing. Because again, we're all, I mean, there's value to what we've been through. And then also and it's not I don't want it to just seem like, all right, we're just gonna push on academia, but for everyone, for us all to be able to learn from each other and grow, and that's important. If there's some finances that are tied to that, then come on, let's make that equal as well. Oh, question back there.
More about exactly how much you paid and how you got payment to participants. That's something that's, I wish there was a class taught on how to do that. It's super complicated to get reimbursed.
Did you ask that one more time?
Yeah, how much did you pay participants? How did you actually get money to them through the university processes?
Yep.
It's tricky.
We've done this a couple different ways. One of them involves having somebody in your business office who's willing to be creative.
Right.
That's
That-
the problem you're having.
Yeah,
Now.
in our current. So we currently have, from this initial, Karen kind of mentioned this, from our initial kind of like ad hoc group of advisory board meetings, we developed this standing advisory board. The way that we're now writing this into grants is Nehemiah as our community partner. That they're we're not putting it in as a subcontractor, but they are running the community advisory board meetings. So Nehemiah is coordinating food, they are coordinating and compensating the facilitators, they're providing stipends for the participants, and then they're invoicing us, per meeting or per series of meetings or whatever, and we're paying them. And that one-off transaction still has to be justified, and it still has to be legitimate from a university standpoint. And there are dollar amounts at which that becomes more and less tricky, or just requires more justification, but it's one transaction. And that requires trust. Like, it requires us to trust Nehemiah, and it requires, that like they're going to do what they, is in this bill of services, and also requires them to trust us that like we're good for it. But with that partnership and with that trust, that's how we've been able to do it in a way that's a lot, yeah.
And as far as, and that, we have different flexibility as a community organization where we can make payments. So that's so people can't wait a month, 6 weeks to get their money. Come on.
Right.
I mean, seriously. So one of the biggest things I think that, and I saw a lot of nods, which is great, but just in case you haven't thought of this, or there's people that you're working with who haven't thought of this. There's a difference if you're doing this work as part of your usual paycheck. But who's coming? Who are you inviting in? They're giving you their time until that exchange happens. Also, it depends on who you're working with, but there's some people that need money faster than other people. And so why are we making people wait 6 weeks for something that could make a big difference now? So considering that is important. The other thing that we heard a lot from, that was one of the big questions from our community advisory board. We're getting that established, and we're still going to be figuring it out. But how do we give people their money? A check, not everyone can cash a check without a huge fee. Even a gift card, not everyone, like if you give someone a Visa gift card, for example, you can't use that to fill up your gas tank because it puts $100 hold on it, right? So an Amazon gift card, that is not practical for a lot of people. The closer you can get to cash, the better. We're developing, that's a really difficult system, even for us at a community organization. Is difficult for us to be able to get cash ready, but that's what people have said to us, and that's my personal experience. I like to walk out the door with cash too. So, so that's kind of the process we're working on. Just one other thing, we're working on kind of like a standard schedule about recommendations about how much stuff could cost. If it's a survey or something like that, $10, $20. Depending on how long and involved the survey is. But for things like focus groups, we like to think about $50 an hour as kind of a contractor consultant fee. And that would be for a general focus group. If you're really tapping into a specific expertise, you probably want to look around for the standard in your area for consulting in that lane. And then that's how much you pay people.
For the participants of our groups, our focus groups, they were paid $75 and it was 2 hours, but about half an hour of that was dinner too. So it ended up being $50 an hour.
And we raised it in our next grant.
That's 100 for a 2 hour. Dr. Chambers.
This is gonna come out weird, so I'm trying to. So we talked about systemic change. I'm curious about people's thinking based on your experience. How do we get to a point when we don't talk about university community partnerships, when university is a member of the community? And we've created these two entities, which in my view are really one entity, and it's not a partnership, right? It's all one. And if we're talking about systemic change, how do we get to a point when it's organic and university as partners or communities as partners, university as part of that? Automatically think about these kind of relationships when we build proposals, when we build ideas. Even when you think about how do we get something past the ethics board, right? And we say things about kind of issues we bring up right here in the ethics, university ethics board. For those of you who don't know, we got to get permission to do stuff. Get to a point when they don't raise an eyebrow about paying people to do things we get paid for. Right? How do we do that organically? How do you all think about that? We don't have to go through a billion hoops in order to demonstrate that the university is part of the community.
I mean, this is how, right? This is
Right.
one of the ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, is saying what works and how it needs to be. And then folks being willing to take those risks in your proposals, to talk to your department heads, to talk to your business office. And be as honest as you can in those proposals. Because, you know, for a long time, our funding structures, even in the community, we're bound by what our funders want to see, and it's not always real. And that's, I mean, my personal feeling about why we stay locked in racial disparities, is because we're not allowed to report the real data, because people don't want to see it. And so how do we keep pushing towards that reality? And it's really about learning as much as possible, talking to people within our systems, using what you learned today, taking it and pushing it within the UW, within our granting bodies and our funding structures. How do we make those changes? Who's on the review committee? A lot of people are making great strides and putting community, I mean, a lot of, you know, us from Nehemiah have been on grant review panels. But how do you make sure that's part of like the real review and not just like the, hey, we did this kind of thing, right? It's part of the actual score. Listening to when someone says this isn't the rubric that we have here isn't what the real evaluation, here's what we need to include. So all those pieces are really important. Also, I'm on the institution, I'm on the IRB minimal risk. So how do we get more community members on the IRB? First of all, I'm also happen to be the prisoner, one of the prisoner advocates on the IRB. So that's one way, is being able to say like, yes, this is the federal regulation, and here's why what you're saying doesn't fit that ethical guideline, because you don't get the framework. So again, I mean, to get to your point, I mean, right, it's going to be a while before we can look at it as one, because the view is just so far apart. But the more we share these things and push for it, and that means, you know what, it means you got to take some financial hits. There's going to be some grants you can't get, and there's going to be some money you might have to give back, because they're asking you to do something that doesn't work, and that's not ethical. So give that money back. I mean, sorry, you have to do it. So.
Well, but also I think inviting them to the table too, right? I think that's very important. They need to be here, right? They need to be in this environment, understanding how does this work? How have you been able to? You have to be able to show success at times, right? To be able to say, all right, this is what we've been doing, and then also let's push it a little bit more. But we need your involvement. We need you to be a part of this. I saw two hands up.
Relationship. I mean, because it's real.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that universities don't trust community folks.
Yes.
I think that's why we build walls. And policies and practices restrict the kind of community that I'm talking about, where universities are part of communities. And I'm just curious, how do we deal with the issue of trust, which is intangible in some ways, but right, it's, I mean, experience, we feel it, but we don't say it.
But that goes both ways though, right? The fact that I mean, why would I trust Dan or any of y'all, right? And the only thing, I know you're trying to get some data that's going to work for you. That's not going to necessarily apply to my life, change generations or any of that for us as a community, for me or anyone else that's connected to. So I think it has to start there. And that's why I say, you know, you have to be willing to push over the line the same way for me, to make sure that we're having that real conversation. And that's the only way it's going to change. Because other than that, the next 5-10 years, we're going to be having this exact same conversation because neither one of us are really willing to budge. We may budge here and there every once in a while, but to make it, we have to be consistent in what that budget looks like, right? And then when there are issues, we have to talk about those as well, as real as possible, and put them on the table.
Let me just throw a thought in there, like, to the point that you're asking, like, I strongly believe, like, you gotta utilize wisdom in everything that you do, right? And to the point that Anthony made, one way you show people is through success, right? You start to show them something, a model in which, I mean, can't be denied. This is something that has happened, is happening, and changes is happening in the midst of it. So being able to show someone sometimes versus having that conversation, just getting them in front of just to be able to see, these are the things that's taking place. And part of what you're saying as far as it shouldn't be, you know, the UW and the community, because UW should be part of the community. The only way that really truly starts to happen is the UW has to reflect the community and vice versa, right? Because if it doesn't look the same, then it's not the same. I'm gonna
So we're gonna have to pause the conversation. Well, I'm sure we're all happy to keep talking, but we're gonna have to pause the conversation officially just so we don't push everything else back. But thank you all for showing up and engaging, and let's keep it going.